So one of the things we discussed extensively in the past with your organizations was the need for EMA to support understanding of biosimilars because it was clear at the time when these medicines were first coming onto the market that it kind of represented a new paradigm of regulatory science. At the time, it was a novel approach to medicines development, coming often with a reduced clinical package, but of course, a wealth of quality and comparability data. And it was, at that point, it was highlighted that in order to achieve sustainable uptake, regulators had to step up a bit the information. Go to slide number 3, please. Next one, please. Thank you. So at the time, if you remember, there was a lot of dialogue and we sat with many of you in focus groups to understand what were the knowledge gaps, the concerns, what type of information was needed from us. And that's how we prepare materials that were targeting either patients or healthcare professionals, trying to address the concerns at the time. And this was also done in collaboration with the European Commission and in the context of a multi-stakeholder dialogue that had been set up by the Commission at the time. Next slide, please. Yeah, so following on the years, what happened is that EMA put out these two strategic papers, the Regulatory Science Strategy and also the European Medicines Agency's Network Strategy, and biosimilar uptake, but in particular communication also plays a role in the strategic priorities. So it was highlighted that it was indeed important to really promote the availability of these medicines to increase the wealth of biological medicines that patients could have access to, but also support the uptake of biosimilars by healthcare systems. And one action that is part of the strategy is to roll out strategic communication campaigns to patients and healthcare professionals to reinforce trust wherever we see that there is a gap or a need to do so. Next slide, please. So the statement that Stefan has introduced and that was discussed at the shortages workshop really came about because the member states and also EMA acknowledge there is really a need to step up a bit communication in this area. So it was clear that the science hadn't changed. So biosimilars that were approved in the EU via EMA could be used and can be used interchangeably if the national regulatory agency allowed it. And as Stefan mentioned, there's a wealth of science now supporting that prescriber-led switching is a common practice out there in the clinical world. So basically, from a scientific viewpoint, there hasn't been any change. Interchangeability was well established and there were no any concerns. However, the agency had not issued any specific communication or recommendation on interchangeability. And at this point of time, it was acknowledged that we really need a harmonized EU-wide communication and position communicated out there to the world because we had identified some uncertainty among some stakeholder groups on the use of biosimilars in clinical practice, and that's how the statement came to arise. And really, the idea is to have a strong EU voice on this, so it's very clear that we don't want uncertainty regarding interchangeability, so that when prescribers come to decide what biological medicines to prescribe, you know, there is this communication that can support them. Next slide, please. So here is the statement you're probably familiar with it. It was first published in September. And as Stefan mentioned, we are now including in an ongoing update a sentence to really make explicit that interchangeability should only be done when considering the conditions of use which are reflected in the product information, because as many of you might be aware, sometimes the reference medicine has more indications approved than the biosimilar or vice versa. So it is important that this is explicitly mentioned. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is the Q&A that Stefan referred to as well. And he already explained some of the content that is right now on the current version on our website. But also we are including a few more questions to try to address what we have seen coming from healthcare professionals or from patients, the questions that have been raised to either us or member states. So you have there some example on whether switching is allowed when biosimilars and reference medicine have different indications, or when there are different conditions of use. For example, if one of them contains a different excipient that poses a contraindication in the product information. And yeah, the switching can be done, but of course it's important to follow the conditions of use that are either in the SMPC. And also what happens when their manufacturing changes to the biosimilar or the reference medicine, whether interchangeability can take place. And we also explain this, why this can be allowed because of the way the evaluation takes all this into account, and this is all changes are subject to regulatory approval and follow all the scientific guidelines. So we explain this in the latest update of the Q&A. And I think that's my last slide. I hope you found this useful, and yeah, as Stephen said, we'll be happy to take questions or comments. Thank you.